I grew up in a very thrifty family. We were encouraged to make and we were encouraged to mend, but I didn't really, I mean, it was just something we did, so it wasn't something that I particularly thought cerebrally about. We always had a drawer, or a few drawers of bits of string and different glues and like all of those sorts of things, and my brother and I were allowed to use tools. We were within reason, obviously, but we could go and get stuff out and mend things or play with things or make things from pretty much whatever was around us. So I guess that was sort of inherently in me, or like nurtured into me in some way or another. My family were also very DIY oriented, so it was, if something around the house needed doing, they would do it themselves, and a lot of like sewing clothes and generally like tending to things, growing vegetables, like they were always busy doing stuff. So that sort of, I guess that way of being, of like looking after the things that you have, or the environment that you're in, and also using and reusing materials, and seeing what you can do with scraps of things, or what you can do with like the inside of this bit of packaging and how you might use that in a different way. It was just something that was always around me, so it's just something I've kind of carried on doing.
It's exciting that it's become a PhD, though,
isn't
it?
Yeah, and it was actually, I was having a conversation with a friend who was also a maker, and who had a fairly similar upbringing, and it was that conversation that kind of prompted me to start thinking about that way of doing things in a kind of more critical or more academic sort of way. It was very much a sort of light bulb moment where I was like, oh yeah, that's actually a really important thing from a making perspective. Like, how does repair fit into making, and where does it stand in that sort of grey zone of kind of making and upcycling and reuse, repair, recycling, all of those sorts of things. But also I've been concerned for the environment. I've been an environmentalist for a long time, so it was also something about that as well, whereas like actually it has a political I was going to say undertone, but actually maybe it's more overt really than that. But there's definitely a political slant to it as well, that if we mend our things, we own our things more, or we understand our things more. We can understand how they're produced maybe more, or how we are locked out of them as consumers. And also by really touching something, by looking at how it's broken or where it's frayed, or how it's been made, by taking it apart, maybe it actually also connects us to those humans across the world who are making our things that come to us as sort of anonymized objects, and it actually like links us into that chain a bit more, and lets us understand that bigger industrial process a bit more as well.
So I guess as things have been outsourced, we don't see the making process the same. So repair is a entry into that, is what you're suggesting.
And I think exactly. And also our objects are kind of presented to us as like monads, like as these single solid objects, like so if you're completely disconnected from the making process, say of a shirt, and you just get a shirt and it doesn't have like a spare button or a bit of yarn on the label inside it, so there's no indication of like those kind of little add-ons give you an indication, oh, you can tinker with this, you can become a part of this in a makerly kind of way. So if none of that is there, it's just this solid object, right? It's a shirt. So how do you then, like, I guess, start to break into that? How do you penetrate that? In what way? How do you sort of get inside that? And I think repair, or those other kind of like tinkering techniques are they're real entry points into that sort of making process. Yeah.
So do you find that most people that are involved in repair have a background of it, or can people come to it with a new perspective, perhaps driven by a sustainable concern.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, obviously, I've not met everyone who repairs, right? But in my experience, it's a real variety. There's some people who have always fiddled with things, always made things, always repaired things. There are people who it's a completely fresh idea to. There's also a fair chunk of people for whom it is something that happened in the past, like, oh, my grandma used to mend things, or, you know, my mum used to mend everything. And so there's like this kind of, or like, oh, people used to do that, yeah. You know, so there's this like historical link, but not necessarily something they do now. And there is often an environmental interest, but not always. There is, I would say there's nearly always a personal want with the kind of repairs that I encounter, where it's like someone's got something that is usually theirs and that they want to make it work again in whatever that kind of encompasses. So they're not, they might understand the environmental element of it. They might be saying, I want this to work because I don't want to put it in landfill, but there's usually also, and I want it to work, you know, because I want to wear it again.
So an attachment, emotion, yeah. Almost.
Emotional and pragmatic as well, you know. Certainly with some of the repair events that we've done, it's, you know, I want this to work because it keeps me warm, or because I cook my dinner in it, or, you know, whatever it is. I help organise with a group called Hackney Fixes. We run community repair events across Hackney, which is a large borough in the East End of London. And we had an event on Saturday, so people bring their broken electronics and we match them up with a fixer, and they work together to repair their things. And one of the things that we had this weekend was the battery from an electric bike that had stopped working, that the person uses for mobility because they suffer from arthritis, and so it helps them get around. So that's an attachment through enjoyment, yes, but also necessity, because it's mobility, you know, and mobility counts for a lot, right? It's an important part of life. So yeah.
We were talking about natural fibres in particular, and whether there's some kind of real life attachment because they're part of nature and we're part of nature.
Yeah, I'm kind of like, it's a real speculation, a real like kind of, I don't quite know how to work it out or how to like pinpoint it, but I do sometimes wonder if, in terms of clothing or textiles around us, whether we're drawn to fixing natural materials, or often fixing natural materials because we are also natural beings ourselves, and so whether there's some interconnectedness through the fact that we are of nature, of the planet, and so that kind of links us into it in a way, you know, that we are not necessarily like synthetic beings. I haven't quite managed to work out whether that's true, or, you know, if there's I feel like there's a kernel of truth in it, but I haven't quite pinpointed how. I also, you know, I kind of wonder with it whether we see some of our sort of aging or lifespans within how those materials age as well, you know, like the thinning of things and the wearing of things. I don't know. I mean, it's I guess slightly rooted in like eco-feminist politics, but also in observation and just kind of wonder as well. Yeah.
You might have a PhD student investigate that eventually.
Yeah, rather than me.
Can we talk about the levels of visibility of mending?
Yeah.
You know, because I guess it's, some people don't necessarily want it to be obvious, but they want it to be functional. Can you talk to that?
So for me, mending is quite often presented as a sort of a binary, or a series of binaries, really. But it's specifically with this, it's like visible or invisible. But I feel like it's actually much more of a scale, and we should approach it as more of a scale. And the reason that I think that is because visible mending is really great in many, many ways. It's great for provoking conversations. It's great for developing a particular aesthetic or adding bespoke elements to a garment and things like that. But it's also, I think for me, it has a real connection to privilege in that, again, it's much easier to mend certain items which are made from certain materials. And so often those garments which are mended in a visible way are sort of more expensive, made from more expensive materials. So they're made from like wool or pure cotton denim or linen and so on and so forth. But also to wear visibly mended clothes, you have to be in a position to be able to do that. So if you are in a role where you have to wear a particular uniform or so on and so forth, you can't necessarily wear visibly mended things. So there's a kind of element of privilege that goes along with that end of it. On the flip side of it, when you think about invisible mending, you have something which is highly skilled, very, very highly skilled to do a truly invisible mend. And also in that sort of sense, quite hard to get to, because it's really difficult to mend something properly invisibly. So actually, if you think about the middle ground of that, where you can make something as invisible as possible and nearly invisible, you can colour match or fabric match or the texture or whatever as much as possible, or maybe you've gone like a couple of tones to the left of what you started with or something like that. It doesn't have to be hugely visible, it doesn't need to be completely invisible, but there can be some sort of sensitivity to the situation in which the garment is worn, the aesthetic of the person who's wearing it. Obviously there's associations with poverty of if you're wearing a lot of mended clothes and those sorts of things. So you can kind of fit the style of mending not just to the garment, but also, I guess, to the feelings and the social elements of the garment, the feelings of the person who wears it, and the sort of social situations that the garment's presented in, if you see what I mean.
The other thing about the privilege associated with mending is that it actually takes time often to do that, unless you're outsourcing the mending, and that's a bit of a luxury too.
Having the time and the energy to do it is definitely a luxury. And the materials, it's fine. I mean, I have a haberdashery of my own, because I've kind of built it up over time. I've got needles, threads, scissors, different thicknesses of yarns, patches, scraps of material and things like that. If you don't have that, then that's also an investment point where you've got to be able to go and get those things, and also be able to afford to go and get those things. So yeah, there's like lots of elements about it. It's one of the things that I find really encouraging about projects where people are sort of sharing their stashes, or there's like sort of boxes of materials in like community centres and things like that, where you can, or community workshops where you can go and use things, but you don't necessarily have to purchase them or own them or store them. The space to store them is also a premium, right?
And do you think mending or repair is a strategy for reducing textile waste? Do you think it makes much difference, or is there bigger issues at play?
I think there are bigger issues at play, but I do also think it makes a difference. And I think that the more mending becomes part of that conversation, the more difference it will make. And you can see bigger brands starting to, or actually having very well established repair systems in place now. So companies like Toast or Nudie Jeans, Levi's have started doing it recently. So those kind of systems are coming into play with bigger companies. There's obviously like a hive of domestic mending going on, which works on a small scale, but I think it sort of snowballs. If you've got 100 people doing it, that's still a reasonable amount of stuff. But it's never going to solve the textile waste issue alone, because that is an issue of production as much as lifespan. There's lots of different elements that come into textile waste. So repair is one solution, but it's not the only solution for me.
What are some of the others?
Sharing, swapping, recycling, better recycling, access to recycling and actual processes, reducing consumption, just tiny
bit.
Reducing consumption, reducing production stuff. All of that takes a change in our economic focus from that sort of growth mindset.
Is government making any, can government play a role, or they're actually vested in production continuing, aren't they?
I think government could play a role. I don't think government is playing a role at the moment, or not a strong enough role for me. I would like to see more of a role in that. It's a huge change, and is it government really, or is it governments? It's got to be a global change, right? Because we have to look at supply chain. You can't just reduce consumption and sack off all the people working in a supply chain because we're not making as much, therefore we don't need to. Everything needs to be considered. So really it's a global shift in how we approach this that I think we need. So it's going to take a variety of solutions on all the different levels and all the different spheres to sort of address that. It has to be a collaborative effort, right?
It starts with individuals, though. That's what I always say. Yeah. And so, can we talk about your own wardrobe and approach to clothes? How's that working?
I buy mostly second hand, and I'm quite minimal with it. I have a relatively stable body shape, so which helps because my clothes are not completely, but more or less a sort of continuous size. So I buy second hand, and I get given second hand clothes, or clothes from people when they don't want them anymore, which I can adapt. I do a reasonable amount of sewing, less at the moment just for general circumstances, but I do more hand sewing at the moment, so I mend a lot of things. I buy new shoes and I buy new pants. Pants because I prefer them new, and I don't have time to make them at the moment, and shoes because I have really narrow feet and it's hard to get second-hand shoes that fit my feet. So but I don't buy a lot. I have one pair of shoes that I wear until they are kaput, and then
well, you're doing your bit then, to reduce waste. But can we just talk about the well-being benefits of being able to tinker with your clothes? I like to hear using that word.
For me personally, I really enjoy it. I think it's a way of making things work for you how you want them. And also when you, particularly with repair, when you've got a garment that you like a lot and you wear a lot, which I tend to do, so that this cardigan is really wearing thin in a lot of places, but I have worn it almost constantly for 3 years now. So it's a way of also keeping those things that you really enjoy wearing, right? So I think there's sort of comfort value in that. There's an emotional comfort in wearing something that fits you well, that you enjoy wearing, that serves the purpose that you need it. It's keeping me warm, or it's suitable for work or whatever like that. So I think there's the physical well-being of sitting and focusing on a task and allowing yourself to enter a sort of flow state, whether that's just very insular, or whether you're listening to a podcast and whatever you're doing. But I think there's also the emotional well-being of knowing that the clothing you're wearing works for the thing that you need it to work for. And I think being able to, or feeling confident in doing that is another thing as well. I can have a go at this. I've developed the skills to do this. is another element of well-being for me, that there's that sort of sense of ability that comes into it as well.
And the skills are just learned by doing, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
There's nothing particularly sophisticated about it.
No, and mending hasn't really changed. Clothing mending in particular hasn't really changed throughout time. I think the thing that has changed is the materials that we do it into and the way the garments are produced. So, for example, jumpers being sewn from cut knitted meterage rather than knitted as a jumper form, if you see what I mean. So like those sorts of elements, and also like mixed fibres and things like that, but the actual techniques have stayed the same. And I don't think you need to start off by mending your most precious like heritage garment, that this is the thing that I want to keep forever. I think you can start off by fixing a hole in your tea towel and just developing the skills that way, and sort of starting almost with like a soft entry point, because really it is about repetition, and understanding how tight you want to pull the thread, or how big your personal stitch is, what tools suit you, what length of needle, what darning mushroom if you use one, and so on and so forth. So it's just practice. And one of the beautiful things about it is that you can always undo it. You're not bound by a textile mend.
Mm. And from a mental health perspective, is it helpful? And in what way?
This is not particularly my field of expertise, so I can only really speak from a sort of personal experience. But I would say yes, because I think that knowing that you have some options with what you do with something when it comes to what could be its end of life or end of life with you, I think that is good for you. I also think that my experience in community workshops is that I've learned a lot from running them or hosting them, and also participating in them, and that idea of sitting down and mending with a group of people and talking not just about what you're doing, but just talking with them is also really healthy, and sort of being a part of something, even if it's just for a few hours, and being around people who are interested in trying these things that you want to try as well. I think it does appear to me to be good for your general mental well-being.
So the social connection there.
Yeah, social connection, and a sense of control, a sense of choice. I can fix this if I want to, or I can have a go at fixing this if I want to. I don't have to throw it away. I don't have to be passive. I can be active with it. I've been working on this jumper for quite some time now. It's really the result of me not storing it carefully when I put it away for winter, so the moths really heavily ate it. And most of the mending actually that I've done on it, I've just done by myself, just at home in the evenings, using a variety of techniques. So just using a normal stocking darn, and also some patches underneath from another very damaged jumper. So I've used the fabric stitching like that. There's still quite a lot to go on it, but I've also I've worn this jumper quite a few times. Well, I wear it quite often, but I've worn it specifically a few times when I've run mending workshops, to kind of provoke discussion, and also to show different approaches to mending. And I've also taken it with me when I've been mending with other people. And one of the things that I like about workshops or mending with other people is the sort of sense of community it brings. So when you're sitting together trying things out, or carrying on with a piece of work like this, or discussing how you might tie your ends in, or neaten up your stitches, or whether you hide your work or you leave it on the forefront. I think it really I find it very warming. I find it really an important part of this way of working, that it's not completely done in isolation, that it does bring that opportunity for conversation and for being together, and for seeing how other people might approach these kind of things compared to how I do it. and also learning different things from people. One of my favourite darning mushrooms I got given actually after seeing a friend who had a very similar one, and it was a different shape to all the ones that I had, but it means that I can go into sleeves and things much more easily because it doesn't have a stem on it. And those sort of things that I wouldn't have found out if I just worked by myself at home all the time.